We started Shazam in 2000 and we exited to Apple in 2018. I had the privilege of being an early investor in Riham's company, and I've served on the board since.
I had to quickly learn that you jump off the cliff and you build the parachute as you go along, as opposed to you build the parachute, make sure it's all working perfectly, and then you jump.
I really look for what I call proper entrepreneurs, people who are just relentless in their drive, who don't know how to take no for an answer, will bounce back from setback after setback, and stay true to their ultimate goal and their vision.
I always thought, oh, you don't want to fail, you don't want to fail. The acronym for fail is the first attempt in learning. So I never fail, I learn.
This is going to be a special episode where we sit with not just one, but two incredible founders and learn from their experiences, the similarities and the differences between them. One, Riham Sati, a neuroscientist turned founder who's building an incredible AI startup. On the other hand, we have the co-founder of Shazam, one of the world's first music recognition apps. And Apple acquired Shazam in 2018. Dhiraj is going to bring his perspective of someone who's been through the grind, exit, and everything in between. We also have a founder dilemma where we'll hear Riham and Dhiraj's perspective and advice. So stick around. Riham, Dhiraj, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having us.
So maybe we go first with Riham. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. So your summary actually summed it up really well. Neuroscientist by background, turned entrepreneur. I never wanted to be a founder or an entrepreneur. It was never on my cards. And that's probably down to my upbringing. My parents always taught me about the world of academia. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go become an engineer, and then I'm going to go become a neuroscientist, then do a postdoc, professorship, the whole academic route. And then I stumbled into the world of entrepreneurship by pure accident. And now I absolutely love it. Never judge a book by its cover. We've got a very simple goal, like you mentioned, Maria, about creating fairness in the workplace. We're a team based in the UK, but clients all over the world, trying to help organisations make optimal decisions and mitigate human capital risks. And I've known Dhiraj actually since 2018. Yeah, it's been a number of years. And one of the most humble people I know, Dhiraj. I'll hand over to you to do an intro as well.
Thank you. That's so kind of you. So I call myself a recovering entrepreneur. So my partner,
love it.
We started Shazam back in the dinosaur era in the year 2000, and we exited to Apple in 2018. And I had the privilege of being an early investor in Riham's company and with Vivek, and I've served on the board since 2018. And for me, it's been a huge privilege supporting two really driven, motivated founders, creating something which has a really positive impact on the planet. And it's been a fantastic partnership between myself and the management team and other board members, and also a great learning opportunity. So I'm excited to share some of these learnings on this podcast.
Amazing. So why don't we break into some icebreakers to get the conversation going? So Riham, I'm going to start with you. Fly on the wall. What are we likely to catch you doing on a lazy Sunday morning?
Oh, trying to get up. So I guess when you're an entrepreneur or you're a founder, it's very hard to switch off. It takes a while to switch off. And I'm one of those people, I admit I'm probably a workaholic. I would just constantly go. And Dhiraj, you know that as well. Over the past year, I've got into reading lots and lots of books, and more fiction books rather than non-fiction books, just to switch off and get my mind thinking creatively. Because when you're always analytical, you're always trying to think, okay, what do I do next? What are my plans, etc. So my Sunday mornings are now actually just reading a book to just gear me up for the rest of the day.
I love it.
Love it.
So when I was an entrepreneur, Sunday mornings would be fast asleep, trying to catch up on the week. Now my life is exactly the opposite. Yeah, it was recovery morning. Now there's no such thing as a lazy Sunday. I've got 3 kids, so I'm driving one to rugby or picking one up from gymnastics. So it's all hands on deck on a Sunday morning. So life takes some strange turns.
Amazing. And maybe one more. Finish the sentence. The world needs more of.
The world needs more of game changers that are given the opportunity to change the world.
I love that.
I would echo that.
Dhiraj.
I would echo that. So people who think big and believe in being part of the change that they want to see. So I had a very similar response to Riham.
Love it. So maybe we go very quickly into the episode. It would be lovely to get a sense, Riham, from you were an accidental entrepreneur. That was not on the cards for you. I'm curious as to maybe why, and then also what point you decided, yes, I'm going to do this, I'm going to build this. Would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Pure accidental and not afraid to admit it. I guess an accidental entrepreneur. How did it come about? So this was trying to get a friend a job was how it started. and there's a plot twist at the end. So bear with me. When I was studying at uni, Vivek was a huge fan of Microsoft and still is. Wanted to get a job at Microsoft. And he said, I'll just submit my CV over. And I was like, what do you mean submit your CV over to Microsoft? What are you on about? If you submit your CV, they get thousands of applications. And I think the number of applications now have increased by 30% because now everyone's using AI.
Yeah.
I said to him, there must be another way to try and grab their attention. So in true fashion, we spent about a weekend just building an app of Vivek's CV, and we put it up on the Microsoft Windows Store. Got rejected. Microsoft said nope. And so we went back to the drawing board, and then we let other people upload their resumes on this app. Got about it, carried on doing my research, and then I get an email from Microsoft going, hey, you're the top app on the Windows Store. I'm like, you what? So we had about 50,000 downloads in about a couple of weeks, climbing about 100 a day. Get an email from Microsoft saying, can you come over to the office, please? Finally, Vivek, this is your chance to get a job. We met up with Jeff Hughes, who's actually one of our other investors and board members at MeVitae. And so he was, how did you manage to capture all this data? I was like, I have no idea. Can you get Vivek a job, please? That'd be great. And we started researching the space and the sector and just realized how fragmented it truly is. You've got companies on one side, job seekers in the other, agencies in the middle, RPOs, all of these acronyms. And it just, the pipeline, from a background of engineering, that pipeline looked very strange. And also, it didn't feel as fair as it needed to be. And so we set out on a very simple goal of actually trying to create fairness in the workplace. I started off as trying to get Vivek a job. He's got a job now. He's the co-founder of MeVitae. So we're on to the next job, which is actually how do you create fairness in the workplace?
Yeah.
How did you go from that idea, starting out very early, having that incredible traction, which sounds like it caught you by surprise, to actually having this business?
Yeah, it did catch us by surprise because I wasn't really paying attention to it, to be honest. The beauty back then, there were incubators, accelerators, and there still are, right? And so we went to a place called OUI, or Oxford University Innovation, which is the commercial arm of the university. Showed them what we were doing, and they're like, okay, why don't you join our accelerator incubator space? And that's where we were given mentors, and we started learning the ropes of actually what the hell is entrepreneur, firstly? What does it mean? What does it entail? How do you generate a revenue model? All the things that I should have learnt when I was back in uni. Now we were picking up the pace. And from there, we realized and just started talking to a bunch of prospects. And she said, what are your problems? I felt like a therapist. What's your problems? Can you tell me what your problems are? What are your issues? And you start listening to all of those. And you realize, okay, actually, there's something there. And so we then started building solutions that kind of had more of a product market fit for our clients. And the solutions now turned into kind of a data play, which analyzes lots of workforce data for organizations to identify where their kind of legal compliance HR list risks are, and then actually then counteracts them with different recommendations and solutions that plug into the existing HR systems. So where we were and where we are now, miles apart. And I think every founder, every entrepreneur has a story or journey like that.
Yeah, Dhiraj, would love to hear your perspective on starting out, having your journey over 25 years, the evolution of what started out as something, but then evolves into something else.
Yeah, interesting, because so my story is exactly the opposite of Riham's. So I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and my partners and I wanted to be entrepreneurs, but we didn't have any idea. So we had to start by brainstorming and coming up with something. And most of the ideas were terrible, but the idea for Shazam, which is to identify music over a mobile phone, was the one which we went into. And people said to us, have you got any other thoughts, like you could use it for B2B purposes? And we said, nope, we just have that one idea and we're going to go for it. And very bizarrely, that's exactly the way it was over 18 years from start to finish, except that we had to build a B2B business on the side at one point, just literally to keep the company alive, because the B2C business didn't make ends meet. But that's a different and longer story. But unusually, we didn't pivot. We stuck to the original idea, and it was one which came about literally trying to find something we were excited about as opposed to any particular skills that we had.
And yeah, it's so interesting. On the one hand, you have to find the idea. You want to be an entrepreneur, but you have to find the idea. And on the other hand, you're like, I didn't think entrepreneurship was on the cards for me, but then I got pulled into it because we found a great idea. I would love to talk about maybe the nuances of both. Maybe Riham, on your side, being an Oxford and neuroscience is a completely different path. And I'm sure that there must have been a point in time where you had to make a call. to continue on the path that you in your head was the path, or to go on this other path that's quite risky, quite uncertain. Also, I think you had alluded to it. You come from a very academic background, getting your family on board. Sorry, you want to do what? Build a business that does what? After being this incredible. So I would love to talk about what mental models you leveraged to making that decision where you knew it's this instead of this.
Giving me flashbacks. Yeah, no, I know the exact point. And that's why I said flashbacks. I knew the exact point where that happened. I was just graduated from university. We're sitting at home and we had this idea. Had no funding, no investment, nothing. And we were thinking, okay, how do we make this happen? Do I carry on academia or do I continue with this path? And I guess the beauty of being an academic is you know how to write lots of grant applications. That's what they teach you really well. So, okay, we don't have a product yet to go to investors. And I know that they will probably ask for some traction initially. So let's avoid that path for now. Raise only when we need to raise. And then we wanted to focus and dedicate all our attention to this. Because I guess one thing I learned was being an entrepreneur is like a jack of all trade, master of none / some, depending on who you talk to. Whereas in academia, you specialize in a fraction of the world's knowledge. And I realized I was more of a jack of a trade rather than a specialist. And so that mental decision was always made. But we got to this point where I had a couple of weeks of kind of runway. I said, okay, I'm going to submit one application form, one funding grant. If we get this grant application, we're all good. Day in, day out, I felt like writing a novel. I spent weeks and weeks just writing this grant application and just submitted it, just thinking, okay, let's hope we've got this. And the results, it takes about 3 months for the results.
You've put in an application.
Oh my God.
I wasn't, because I was sitting there thinking, processing, going, oh gosh, I was just thinking, mulling it over. And we got it. And I was like, oh gosh. So we accumulated, I think it's about several thousand, £100,000 of funding. So, okay, this is it, Vivek. We've got the grant funding. Let's build a team. And that moment, we got our office at the European Space Agency at Oxford, which is where our office still is. And we got a bunch of tech equipment, got a team that we brought on board, started building products, getting it to market. And that was the inflection point where it all tipped. I remember it like it was yesterday.
And what about you, Dhiraj? At what point did you say, I want to be an entrepreneur? I don't know the idea yet, but this is what I want to do. Was that not how it happened?
So I had a great job, which I really loved. This was back when the internet was booming and everyone wanted to be an entrepreneur. So I had jumped on that bandwagon. So my partners and I, when we decided to start this company, so I quit my job literally the week that the NASDAQ hit its peak in 2000. Talk about bad timing. And it was all downhill from there. So yeah, it was actually similar to Riham, but different. I didn't know anything about writing grant applications. So we went out to Angels to raise some money. This was the summer of 2000. And we had a little demo which we had created. We had a bunch of PowerPoint and spreadsheets which showed that this business was going to be enormous within 5 years. We raised $1 million in the summer of 2000, and it was exactly the same thing. Wow, time to go.
I love it.
Amazing. And you obviously Dhiraj, you went down the path of raising successive rounds. I'm just curious, the Riham journey and Dhiraj, looking back at your journey raising capital, what are some of the things in hindsight that you would have done differently potentially? And Riham, what path have you decided to take in terms of fundraising? Not many people even know to apply for grants, for example. So we'd love to get into that.
Absolutely. I can touch upon that briefly. So yeah, we decided initially to go for grant applications because we wanted to build traction before we went to investors. That was a conscious decision and once we started getting traction and started getting clients and revenue, we thought, okay, now we need to scale up and hire more people and ramp up on the back of that. And so that was around the 2018 mark, just before 2018, actually just around the time where I met Dhiraj. And investments, it was our first investment round. It took a while to close that round, and it's because I guess it was a very new experience, just talking transparently, building out the pitch deck, the data rooms, talking to investors, and it suddenly chips at you as well, because I was at Reading at the time, and I would take the train into London, meet a bunch of investors, hear the answer no, go back home, go, okay, build yourself back up and do it again the next day. You catch the train back into London, you go back and forth and all you need is one, right?
Yeah.
One is what you need to kick off the journey. I could write a book of all the stuff that we've learned along the way. But I think the kind of important ones that I think stayed with me along the way, and this is what we raised initially in 2018, is about £500,000. And we did subsequent rounds since then. For us, the key learnings was, you don't give up, you keep going, you pick yourself up, you dust yourself off and you keep going. Second thing is you learn from the experiences of the no. You learn more from the no's than you do from the yeses. And getting that feedback and using it to iterate was also powerful. And having a very targeted list of the investors you wanted to speak to and network with, because that makes sure that you're very focused and very tailored in your approach.
Yeah.
That approach has always been used for any round that we've done along the way.
I agree with what Riham said. We had the great fortune to raise our round in 2001, which was the worst possible time for Series A fundraise.
Yeah.
So the NASDAQ had lost 70% of its value. There was blood on the streets of dead startups everywhere. We managed to get an $8.5 million round away, which took a huge amount of work. We spoke to every VC in London and on the continent. Then we knew that they were in for the ride. And what I've learned over time, we've raised 5 rounds, both in good times and in bad, is that it's not just about the money, it's the people who come with it, who's on your board, who's backing you when times are tough. And that's been a big learning. We had the luxury when we raised our angel round of being able to choose our angel investors. We wanted people with expertise in music and in mobile, who really understood technology. We didn't have that luxury subsequently when we did our Series A. So you just learn that to raise in both good times and bad times. And that's something which I try to bring to the table when I'm helping today's generation of entrepreneurs.
I love it. 2 things are coming at me as I'm hearing you speak. I think the first is that there's some nuance on finding your believers. Because I'm looking at you, Dhiraj, you're on this podcast with Riham and you're an investor and you're an advisor. There are investors who believe, who understand, who see the world you're trying to build. It's almost like connecting with them and making sure that you're on that journey together, I think is something that I'm beginning to see as a thread. And then the other thing I would say, and I would love to hear your thoughts on both of this, is what's been your experience raising for 2 different business models? Because if you think about it, you had hinted at it on the consumer side, but then Riham, you're building a B2B software platform. You're really supporting the businesses. Talk to us a little bit about the nuances of the things you had to think about, both from a business model perspective that may or may not have impacted fundraising.
I can touch upon that briefly. And from my perspective, yes, absolutely B2B from our perspective. And I think metrics are relatively straightforward. Revenue, churn, NRR numbers, all of those are the classic ones that investors want you to hear about. But I think the one that I'm going to touch upon is something that was very unique in our case, is when we started off, we were never a kind of a platform. What we did is we integrated into, and still do, integrate into lots of HR systems. So for us, the wording we used to say and still say to a lot of our clients and prospects is, the less you see of us, the better. We should be in the background and it should not disrupt any of your current process, and it should be seamless. Now, for us, that meant, it's very hard to demo something that you don't really see, right? Because there's no platform for it. And we've taken a very partnership driven approach to our organization. That's how we work and that's how we get a lot of our clients. It's very kind of partnership driven. I think lots of organizations, enterprise ones, follow this model. Microsoft is a classic example of a partnership driven business. But that became an also very important part to our, not just route to market, but also our fundraising story. On top of all the classic ones, what's your team size, how much are you raising, what are you doing with the funds, all of those ones. Partnership was quite a unique one for us. And I think it's one that we made a very conscious decision on very early on, but it's been a pivotal part to our journey and story.
And from a sales cycle perspective, are there any lessons, especially selling to businesses, that maybe in retrospect, you would, if you could talk to yourself, you would say, maybe think about it this way, or things you did well that just seemed to work really well?
Yeah, there's a few things. So with a partnership driven approach, you end up building a tighter relationship with your clients as well, because that referral, someone who's heard about you, it's always better than rather going cold. And I think that's something that we did really well at the very beginning and still do, is making sure that we leverage that relationship with our existing partners to drive prospects and leads. I think the other thing that I think we've done really well is the relationship between ourselves and our customer success team. A lot of people that I talk to initially, they would have your sales team close the deal and then move straight to customer success, where in our case, we overlap it. So as we know a client is closing or getting to that close stage, our customer success get involved in that process. So they work together to get the kind of like client over the line and implement the solution. And I think that forms a tighter relationship. And that's what makes our clients really appreciate what we do. And I think that's really important, especially when you're doing kind of B2B, that customer success and sales are just as important as each other. But I've also learned lessons of maybe we shouldn't have done this. We've hired like sales engineers thinking that was a smart thing to do, and absolutely not. That wasn't a good decision. So there's also the goods and the bads, I'd say.
Now, on the topic of partnerships, we've actually had a dilemma come through out. So we always tend to ask our listeners for dilemmas that they may be experiencing with their businesses. I'm the founder of a music app designed to make songs part of people's everyday lives, whether that's adding a track to voice notes, syncing a vibe to a workout, or soundtracking a spontaneous moment. We've finally hit product market fit, but we're burning fast and only have 6 months of runway left. Out of the blue, a major tech platform approaches us. They want to natively integrate our apps into their operating system, meaning overnight we'll go from thousands of users to hundreds of millions. But there's a catch. They want exclusivity. No Android, no web, just their ecosystem. And more than that, they want to control how and dictate our UX. Essentially gatekeeping which artists get surfaced and push algorithmic decisions that favor major label content over independent creators we have built this platform to serve. Do you feel this deal makes sense for us? And knowing what it means in ceding creative control and compromising the artist first mission we've started with, or do we walk away, risk the company going under, but keep our values and independent intact? We would love to hear your perspective on that, Dhiraj, and just your previous experience in managing partnerships. Obviously, the Shazam was acquired by Apple. Sharing your perspectives on that would be incredibly insightful.
Sure. So I've got two answers to that question. The first answer is definitely not, because you want to straight your values and your mission. The second answer is definitely yes, because that's exactly what we did in the early days of Shazam. When we were trying to get distribution, the only things which would work was partnerships with mobile operators in different parts of the world. And they would have a proprietary ecosystem. They would give it a different name. They would control the branding, etc. And so we had no choice in the matter, because it was the only way to access the customer. When the iPhone launched, or when the App Store launched, Shazam was one of the first apps on that platform. And Apple said to us, what would you like to call the service? And we said, Shazam. And that's how we became one experience across different platforms. I think it's a great dilemma. And again, yeah, my immediate instinct and reaction is no. But sometimes one needs to make difficult choices or make pragmatic choices, and then it's not always the final play out.
Yeah. What do you think, Riham?
I completely agree. That was my gut reaction. Amazing. Staying true to who you are and what you believe in is fundamental. But definitely, I'd say put the pros and cons on either side. But I agree with Dhiraj on the end.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a middle ground, like maybe something that they could try to make sure that they're sticking with their values. But it seems like the partner is very specific about what they want. We have another dilemma, and I would love to hear both your thoughts on this. It says, hey team, huge fan of the podcast. I've got a situation I'm hoping you can help with. My co-founder and I have known each other for years. Same uni, worked on side projects together, total trust. So when I decided to launch this startup, asking him to join as a technical co-founder felt like a no-brainer. Fast forward 6 months and we still don't have a working product. He told me he could build the MVP himself, but every time I check in, there's either a blocker or a new priority. I've tried to approach it directly, asked where I can help, even offered for us to bring in a contractor temporarily. But he gets defensive, says it's under control, or blames external distraction. Meanwhile, the reality is there's no product, no demo, and we've just closed a small pre-seed round. We even have customers interested in the pilot. Our investors are expecting progress, and I'm stuck in this limbo where I'm burning trust with both him and them. I'm not trying to start a co-founder drama, but we can't build a company without a product. And I'm starting to wonder, was he ever really capable of building this? How do I deal with this without blowing up the relationship or the company? What do you think, Riham?
That's a tough one, isn't it? That's a really tough one. My immediate gut reaction to this is I think you need to classically have a conversation with the founder, with the co-founder in this case, actually understand what is going on from their perspective, what is stopping them from building the product, time constraints, is it actually, and I doubt anyone's going to admit they don't know anything. So you've got to try and navigate that conversation, but understand what it is that's actually the blocker. At the moment, it sounds like there could be multiple things, right? And so I would try and identify and brainstorm what that is first and create an action plan. And very early on, what we did, and I'm fortunate because Vivek and our team is a great co-founder, we did internship programs, we brought other people where it doesn't feel like it's defensive, we actually working together as a team. And so my gut reaction is to have a conversation, understand what the problem is, then create a plan and try and come up with ideas together to solve that. Dhiraj, I don't know what you think on that end.
Yeah, I had a boss once who, whenever he saw me, he just asked me, "Are you having fun?" That was his only question. And I would say yes. And it sounds like a throwaway comment, but I always look for people's energy. Are they enjoying what they're doing? And if you are building and you're making progress, then you can see it on someone's face. And if they're not, then if it's an employee, you just say, "I'm sorry, this is not working out. Time to move on." If it's a co-founder, it's different. If it's a friend, it's someone you're helping out, which is, this doesn't feel like it's a right fit for you for whatever reason. You didn't expect it. I didn't expect it. How do we release this situation so that you can really enjoy what you're doing? And that could be a different role. It could be bringing someone else in, but to use empathy rather than the kind of the construct of work itself.
And I think one thing that really comes out there is just leadership and the importance of navigating the relationships within teams. Looking at both of your journeys, what are some of the key things that you learned about yourselves through the struggles and through the successes of your journeys?
I guess I learned a lot of things about myself in that process. The first one is, I guess, around risk, learning to be a risk taker and a strategic risk taker, I should say, and caveat that. When, again, if I go back to the world of academia, you're taught to be precise and you're taught to actually kind of think about things from a methodological perspective, and you only move once you've made all the kind of right moves. Whereas entrepreneurship is the complete opposite, right? It's you end up having that lean approach. It's not about being perfect the first time round. It's adapting and learning from the back of that, but also taking the risk. And so I had to quickly learn that you jump off the cliff and you build the parachute as you go along, as opposed to you build the parachute, make sure it's all working perfectly, and then you jump. And that is a different mindset completely. And then actually just knowing to be surrounded by people that actually believe in what you're doing, like you said, Dhiraj, the believers who are actually, have done it before, have got the wisdom.
So when we started, our team was 3 MBAs who had never worked together and a chief scientist who was a genius and invented the technology. What I learned is that my job description was useless. So I was the product manager, and my co-founder, Chris, who came up with the idea for Shazam, he was much more interested in the deep, dark details of the product. Whereas I naturally gravitated towards, I guess, coordinating across teams with different backgrounds and different skill sets. I had the experience of working for a company. When I joined them, it was 100 employees. And 3 years later, it was 1,000. So I'd gone through the hyper growth. And from that, I have a big belief in building the right structures and processes so that you can scale a business. Now, this sounds not that glamorous, because if you're a 5 or 10 person startup, it's all about rolling up your sleeves and getting stuck in. So at the end of the day, I don't think it's about my skills or my strengths. I think it's in context of the team. So I cover gaps. I fill in where we might have deficiency, and that's true for others as well. So that's what I think I learned, which is you need an element of specified roles, but over time, the journey takes shape as you discover your skills on the job.
I love that. Is so specific. I love it, because the natural thinking is that you lean towards your strengths and you're fixed on that, but that's going to be malleable. And in the context of the team, you almost need to be a shapeshifter. Wherever you see a gap, you just plug it. I love that. We're getting to the next and like the final half of the session. I would love to get you both to ask each other a question. So maybe Riham, you start. Maybe a question for Dhiraj that you think you'd love to hear, but then also might be relevant for our audience, and Dhiraj the same. So over to you, Riham.
Great.
Oh, this is okay. I've got 1,000,001 questions running right through my head. So I guess one of your big remits, Dhiraj, from always tech for good, right? That was and still is. It's a kind of fundamental key area to what you do and you believe in. And so when you're identifying organizations that you're wanting to work with or collaborate with, and that have that ethos of that tech for good, how are you detecting potential in founders and other entrepreneurs? What do you look out for?
Great question. So I really look for what I call classic or proper entrepreneurs. So people who are just relentless in their drive, who don't know how to take no for an answer, will bounce back from setback after setback and stay true to their ultimate goal and their vision. And that is hard enough to do. But if that ultimate vision includes having an impact on at scale, then that can be even harder to achieve because it's not typically what you'd find within a commercial organization, if you will. So it makes my job great fun, and at the same time gives me the energy to continue to be a shoulder to cry on, or to be there when times get tough. And already, I think in your business, you've been through some cycles, for instance, with COVID, when things looked decidedly perilous. But I guess that in one sense, it's very old fashioned. I'm not looking for people who want to save the planet but don't have the instincts and the courage and the resilience to build what it takes to actually get there.
Agreed.
Yeah, my question for Riham is, if MeVitae played out the way you envisage, if, let's say in 5 years or 10 years from now, what change would you like to see to the world? Like, how would you like the world to be different from what it is today?
That's a great question. There's a few threads to answer this question. The first thread is what I would like from an organization's perspective, which is more transparency when it comes down to how they make decisions, but also how they're identifying talent in their organizations. So make sure that it's A, explainable, and B, it's making sure everyone gets a chance, right? From an employee's perspective or from a candidate's perspective, it's similar to what you said earlier, Dhiraj, about the advice is loving what they do. I would love the opportunity for people to actually love their careers. You spend most of your life working. So for them, the ability to actually make a change in their organization is something that I think is very deep rooted in what we do and what we believe in. From an organization MeVitae perspective, in 5 years' time, I'd like to make sure that the team is rapidly scaled and grown and still maintain that culture of the organization. I think that's one of the strengths of MeVitae is our team and our board. And maintaining that culture and making sure we've scaled. We're opening up our US office this year. And so for us, making sure that we've built on the back of that and actually making a change to these organizations is something that I would love to see day in, day out. And I'm sure we will get there.
We're going to roll on to our lightning leap round. So we're going to ask you a few questions that we would love for you to share a response to. One of them being, what do you think is one of the biggest misconceptions about founders? I'm going to direct this to you, Riham, to start with.
Biggest misconception of founders
or entrepreneur. We have a lot of the audience who are probably building or thinking of building, but what's the one misconception that you share?
That there is a certain look or type to an entrepreneur.
I'm with you on that.
So yeah.
Interesting.
I love that.
Dhiraj, any misconceptions in your sector?
So I think people believe that entrepreneurs are risk takers. I think entrepreneurs are risk managers. So I believe that you're making decisions with incomplete information based on an idea with a lot of uncertainty. And what you work on all the time is minimizing the risk and damage. That's a common misconception, I believe.
Ooh. And maybe what founder or maybe even operator or person do you admire, VC backed or not? One person you admire and why?
The obvious answer is Dhiraj, right? It really is. He's one of the most humble people I know. And I learned so much from Dhiraj, really have. And I wouldn't be here where I am if it wasn't for him and the other board members. So
that is
Dhiraj,
so...
100%.
That's very kind of you, Riham. As I said, I think it's a privilege to serve on Riham's board because otherwise accumulated experience is worthless. I learn all the time from the companies I support. So one person I hugely admire is Dan Murray-Serter, who is the CEO and founder of Heights. And
I'm a big fan of Heights, by the way, and Dan.
So I'm an early investor in Heights. I've invested in every round. What they've built is amazing. But beyond that, Dan created a community called Founders, which brings together all stages of founders. And the idea is to create community, help each other out in a vulnerable way. And so that it's not all about the hustle and what you've achieved, but the problems you're having and the challenges you're facing and asking for help. And that's something which, frankly, we didn't have when we were entrepreneurs because that community didn't exist. But to be able to do a highly successful startup and build that community at the same time is hugely praiseworthy. So hats off to Dan and his team as well.
We are now coming to the end of the episode where we tend to do retrospective questions. But before we go there, I wanted to ask one question for both of you. And this is more on the business model acquisition part. Maybe for Riham, I would love to hear how you met Vivek, how you both decided to do this together, just to give some color on thinking about the early stage team, etc. And then Dhiraj, I'd love to hear from your perspective how you thought about the acquisition, you and the team. We got the dilemma from the founder who's thinking about partnership. I'm sure that there are founders in our audience who are thinking about how do we decide who the right partner in the context of an acquisition is for us. Would love to hear mentor models on that. So maybe Riham, you first.
Absolutely. It's a funny one how I met Vivek. It was at a party. So in Oxford, you have these things called BOPs, which are parties in essence. And each college have their own parties. So the students who are at one college can only attend the party at that college. So I was at GTC and Vivek was at Exeter. And there was a party at GTC. So only GTC students should be attending that. But Vivek, when someone says, no, you do not do this, the default is I'm in. I thought, oh, here's another GTC student. So I approached him, said hi, and he was like, no, I'm not from GTC, I'm from Exeter. Just keep quiet, hello. And that's how I met Vivek. How I knew that it worked really well, because we're very different. Vivek is more introverted and I'm a bit more extroverted, but he's wiser beyond his years. And he knows how to build fantastic technology and takes on advice from anyone and knows how to build a really good relationship with his team. And I think, whereas I'm much more on the commercial side, we filled in each other's gaps, really. And I think that's what made it a really good dynamic. And everyone who works with us understands we've got different styles, but they complement each other.
Thanks, Riham. And Dhiraj?
Yeah, so we'd been in the game for a long time, and we knew that at some point we would exit through an acquisition. The relationship with Apple was a long-standing one because we had worked with them for probably 10 years or more. And as I mentioned, we were one of the first apps on the App Store, and we had a long-standing operating relationship with Apple, which is often a good road towards an ultimate acquisition. When it came down to it, then we hired bankers, we looked at different options, we played the game in terms of finding the right partner. But we were delighted when we got the offer from Apple because it just felt like a really good fit into an ecosystem which values music, which cares for the user and the customer. So it was a fantastic kind of end to the story. I'm not saying it was stress-free or easy, but for any entrepreneur to think backwards from exit is not a bad idea, which is who would be a suitable and a compatible acquirer is a game which starts a long time before you reach that final mile.
I love it.
Now, one of the things that we love to do before we wrap up is just ask around a quick fire question. If you looked back to both of your journeys when you were starting out, what's one piece of advice that you would give to your younger self?
My favourite one is the acronym for FAIL, because I always thought, oh, you don't want to fail, you don't want to fail. The acronym for FAIL, I learned, is the first attempt in learning. So I never fail, I only learn.
Love that.
That's
Dhiraj?
fantastic. When I was an entrepreneur, I was absolutely single-minded. There was nothing else in my life. No wife, no kids, no dog, no hobbies, no sport. And now I play a completely different game. And so it's about balance and being able to learn how to make trade-offs when you are really focused on a goal, but you have to sustain yourself for the long run as well. So that would be my advice, both to myself as well as to today's entrepreneurs.
I love it. And maybe resources. Have there been any particular books or podcasts or resources that have just been phenomenal in your journey?
You mentioned that you read a lot of fiction books. I'd love to hear, even if it's not business related, any books that have been a game changer for you.
Yeah, so my favourite book of all time is a book called Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Rafon. I won't spoil the storyline, but it's a great read. I've never seen anything so unique in my life. Definitely recommend that. So there was one book actually from a non-fiction that I learned a lot about storytelling from, which is how to write a TEDx or TED like story.
Oh, really?
So it taught me a lot about actually how to weave a story and how to be a storyteller, because I think every entrepreneur needs to be able to be a storyteller. And so how do you build that story? How do you incorporate different antidotes? How to make sure that it all connects? How to keep people engaged? And that was how to write a TED. talk.
Love
That was
it.
really, really insightful.
That's
Love
really
it. And you,
amazing.
Dhiraj?
I used to love to read when I was younger, and like for instance, there was a book called Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore, a
Yeah.
classic in the field. Unfortunately,
Classic.
what's happened is over time, I feel like I've got less and less time. So I subscribe to a service called Blinkist, which does book summaries.
Book
And I
summaries,
love it.
yeah.
It's such a great way to access so much knowledge quickly. I even called up the CEO and I said, "Hey, I'm a big fan of Blinkist." He said, "Yes." And I said, "No, nothing. I just wanted to let you know."
Before we wrap up, maybe one more thing, just looking forward. On your end, you
Mhm.
are a tech for good investor. You've mentioned that you're a recovering entrepreneur. I'd love to hear a little bit about your work in that space. What are you hoping to achieve? How's your mindset evolved? Maybe any word for any tech for good investor out there, or sorry, entrepreneur who's building. Yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think these words, Peter Drucker, he said, the best way to predict the future is to create it. I'm an eternal optimist, being an entrepreneur and believing that the world can be a better place through innovation and technology and the diehard spirits who make it happen. And I call myself cause agnostic. And so I look across, there's the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which map out 16 or 17 domains where we can see business being a force for good. So I try to invest across those, always backing founders who believe in themselves, believe in their teams, and believe in their mission. So I think that there's a groundswell of support. I see people from incredible backgrounds, like the former dean Peter Tufano from Oxford Business School, who is involved in climate action, for instance, and both investors as well as experts and people who really want to participate in the role of technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship in creating a better future. If you're an entrepreneur in this space, you have a lot of allies, and I would say go for it because people will back you if they buy into your mission.
I love it. And for
Amazing, thank you.
Riham, just one question then for Riham on MeVitae, tell us a little bit about where we can find you and what the future holds for what you're building.
Yep. So the best place to find more information about MeVitae is on our website. So www.mevitae.com. What the plan is, I hinted earlier about US. So most of our clients are US based, and we've been doubling and scaling pretty much year on year. So we're setting up that office and hiring a US team this year. So I'm excited to do that and continue building our mission and our goals.
Amazing. Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much.
much. This has
This
been
was
Thank
great.
you both.
Really appreciate you
great.
joining us.
Thank you.
This has been
Thank you.
fantastic.
Leave a review, tell us what you think of this episode on all our platforms at the Startup Leap Pod. Do you have a question? Ask us and we'll ask our guest. Go to thestartupleap.io. See you next time.